School bullies kidnap black girl for fun, not realizing she's the mayor's daughter. The van screeched to a halt in the middle of the woods, its tires kicking up a cloud of dust. Inside, the three teenagers laughed nervously, their voices filled with a mix of excitement and fear. At the back of the van, tied up and gagged, 12-year-old Brianna Taylor struggled against the ropes that bound her. Her eyes, wide with terror, darted around the dimly lit interior. She couldn't believe what was happening. The group leader, Derek, leaned back in the driver's seat, his smirk barely hiding his unease. "Relax, it's just a joke," he said, looking over his shoulder at his two friends, Casey and Lauren. "We'll let her go when it's over." Casey laughed, but it sounded forced. "Derek, what if she tells someone? This is way too far." "Don't chicken out now," Derek snapped. "No one's going to believe her. Besides, it's not like anyone important will care." None of them knew who Brianna really was. Suddenly, Brianna's muffled screams turned into guttural sounds of frustration. She kicked wildly, her shoe slamming against the van door with a loud clang. The noise startled the group. Derek cursed under his breath, glancing nervously out the window. "Keep her quiet," Lauren hissed, her hands trembling as she clutched her phone. She had been recording parts of the ordeal, thinking it would be funny to show off later. Derek yanked open the van's back door, glaring down at Brianna. "If you don't shut up." A low rumble of an engine in the distance made them all freeze. Derek slammed the door shut again. "Someone's coming," he muttered, panic creeping into his voice. Brianna's muffled cries grew louder. This was her chance. Derek glared at her, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. "If she gets us caught, I swear." The headlights of an approaching car lit up the woods like a searchlight, and the van's interior fell into stark relief. Lauren dropped her phone. Casey's mouth hung open. "Turn it off," Lauren whispered. "Turn the lights off, Derek." But it was too late. The car pulled up alongside the van, and the driver's side window rolled down. A man's face appeared, stern and suspicious. "What's going on here?" he asked. The teenagers froze, their hearts pounding in unison. It all began a few weeks earlier at Wilson Middle School, where Brianna had just started as the new girl. The first day had gone well enough. She'd found her way to her classes, introduced herself to her teachers, and even made a few acquaintances. But it wasn't long before Derek and his crew singled her out. At first, it was subtle. Whispered jokes when she walked by, giggles when she raised her hand in class. Then it escalated. Someone, accidentally, spilled milk on her lunch tray. Her locker was mysteriously jammed one morning, and she was late to class because of it. She tried to ignore them, but they always found new ways to make her feel small. Brianna told her parents, but they encouraged her to stay strong and give it time. "Kids can be mean," her mom said one evening. "Just remember, they can't take away who you are." If only they knew. By the end of the second week, Brianna dreaded going to school. Every morning, as her mom dropped her off in their sleek black car, a perk of her dad being the mayor of Cedar Creek, she felt the weight of her classmates' stares. Her dad had always told her to keep a low profile. "People don't need to know who you are unless it's necessary," he'd said. Brianna didn't mind. She wanted to make friends for who she was, not for her last name. But the bullies didn't need a reason to target her. Derek, Casey, and Lauren saw her as an easy mark, quiet, new, and black in a predominantly white school. One afternoon, after gym class, Brianna found her backpack missing. She searched everywhere, her heart sinking lower with each passing minute. When she finally spotted it hanging from the gym's basketball hoop, she knew exactly who was behind it. Derek's smug grin confirmed it. "That's enough," she shouted, her voice shaking with anger. "Leave me alone." Derek and his friends burst into laughter. "What are you going to do about it?" he sneered. Brianna clenched her fists, her face burning with humiliation. She wanted to fight back, but her dad's words echoed in her mind. "Pick your battles wisely, Bri." So she turned and walked away, leaving the sound of their laughter ringing in her ears. The day they kidnapped her started like any other Friday. Brianna was walking home after school, earbuds in, when a black van pulled up beside her. She didn't think much of it at first, until Derek jumped out and grabbed her. Before she could scream, a hand clamped over her mouth, and everything went dark. Now, as the man in the car stared down the group, Brianna prayed he would notice her. Her muffled cries grew louder, more frantic. "Is there a problem?" the man asked, his voice firm. "No," Derek said quickly, trying to sound casual. Just, working on a school project. The man's eyes narrowed. At this hour? Out here. Casey fidgeted nervously. Lauren avoided eye contact. Brianna kicked the door again, this time harder. The sound echoed in the quiet woods. What was that? The man demanded. Derek stammered. And nothing. Just some tools in the back. But the man wasn't buying it. He reached for his phone, his movements deliberate. I think I should call someone. Wait. Derek said, panic flashing across his face. Brianna's heart pounded as she saw the man glance toward the van. This was it. She could feel it. Help was so close. But then Derek did something that made her blood run cold. He pulled a knife from his pocket and pointed it at the man. You're not calling anyone, he said, his voice trembling but resolute. The woods fell silent, save for the sound of Brianna's muffled breaths and the man's sharp intake of air. What would happen next? The man froze, his eyes fixed on the glint of the knife. Derek's hand shook slightly, betraying his fear, but he held the blade steady. Casey and Lauren gasped audibly, their shock clear on their faces. This wasn't part of the plan. Put the phone down, Derek ordered, his voice cracking. The man, still seated in his car, kept his gaze locked on Derek. Slowly, he raised his hands, showing he wasn't holding anything. Look, kid, he said, his tone calm but firm. I don't know what's going on here, but this is not the way to handle it. Shut up. Derek snapped, his voice louder now, more desperate. Just leave and forget you saw anything, okay? Lauren grabbed Derek's arm. Derek, stop. What are you doing? This is insane. Stay out of it. Derek yelled, yanking his arm free. You wanted in on this, so don't back out now. The man took a deep breath, his eyes flicking toward the van. Listen, he said slowly, if there's someone in there, you need to let them go. You don't want this on your conscience. Derek's face darkened. You don't know anything about us. Just leave. But the man didn't move. His steady composure only seemed to unnerve Derek more. Brianna, still gagged and tied up in the back of the van, prayed the man wouldn't give up. She kicked the door again, the metallic clang cutting through the tension. What was that? The man asked, his voice sharper now. Nothing. Derek barked, sweat dripping down his temples. Casey stepped back, visibly shaking. Dude, this isn't funny anymore. Let's just leave her here and go. No. Derek turned on Casey, his eyes wild. If we leave her, she'll tell someone. We'll get in trouble. Lauren, tears streaming down her face, whispered, We're already in trouble, Derek. The man took advantage of their arguing and opened his car door, stepping out cautiously. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and clearly not someone to mess with. Last chance, kid, he said, his voice low and serious. Put the knife away and let's talk this out. Derek pointed the knife at him, but his hands trembled visibly. Don't come any closer, he shouted. The man ignored the warning, taking another step forward. Brianna's heart raced. She could barely see what was happening, but she could hear the tension in Derek's voice. She kicked the van door again, harder this time, hoping the man would hear her desperation. The man turned toward the van. Is someone in there? He asked, his tone demanding. Mind your own business. Derek yelled, lunging toward him with the knife. But the man was faster. With a swift motion, he grabbed Derek's wrist and twisted it, forcing the knife to drop. Derek screamed in pain, falling to his knees. Casey and Lauren stood frozen, too scared to intervene. You kids have no idea what you're doing, the man said, his voice firm but not unkind. He looked over his shoulder toward the van. Who's in there? Lauren finally broke. It's a girl. We didn't mean to hurt her. The man's face hardened. He released Derek and strode toward the van. Derek clutched his wrist, glaring at Lauren. Why would you say that? He hissed through gritted teeth. The man yanked open the back door of the van. The sight of Brianna, tied up and gagged, made him freeze for a moment. Then he sprang into action, carefully untying her ropes and removing the gag. Brianna gasped for air, her voice hoarse from screaming. It's okay, the man said gently. You're safe now. Brianna looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. They grabbed me, she stammered. They said it was just a joke, but... Sure, it's over now, the man reassured her. He helped her out of the van and turned to face the teenagers. His expression was a mix of anger and disappointment. You three are in serious trouble, he said. "I'm calling the police." Derek scrambled to his feet, his eyes wide with panic. "No. You can't. It was just a joke. We didn't mean." "This is far beyond a joke," the man interrupted. "You kidnapped someone. Do you understand how serious this is?" Lauren sobbed into her hands, while Casey stood silently, his face pale. Derek, however, clenched his fists, his fear turning into anger. "She deserved it," he spat. "She acts like she's better than everyone else." Brianna flinched at his words, but the man stepped protectively in front of her. "You've got a lot of nerve saying that," he said coldly. "You don't get to decide how someone else lives their life." He pulled out his phone and dialed 911. Derek lunged forward, but the man turned quickly, blocking him with ease. "Don't even think about it," he warned. As the sound of sirens grew closer, Derek's bravado crumbled. He sank to the ground, his head in his hands. Lauren and Casey exchanged terrified glances, knowing there was no way out now. Brianna stood silently, her body trembling. The man placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You're going to be okay," he said. "They can't hurt you anymore." But Brianna wasn't so sure. Derek's hateful words still echoed in her mind, and she knew this was far from over. The police lights flashed in the distance, casting an eerie glow over the scene. For the first time, Brianna allowed herself to hope that justice might be on her side. Then, as the officers approached, Derek suddenly bolted. "I'm not going to jail," he screamed, disappearing into the dark woods. The officers shouted after him, but Derek was fast, his footsteps fading into the night. Brianna's heart sank. The officers sprang into action, their flashlights slicing through the dark woods as they pursued Derek. Brianna stood frozen, her body tense as the scene unfolded. The man who had saved her stayed close, keeping her shielded from the chaos. "Stay here," he said, his tone gentle but firm. "You're safe with me." Brianna nodded, though her eyes remained fixed on the tree line where Derek had disappeared. She could still hear his voice in her head, the venom in his words haunting her. Two officers approached her, their faces a mixture of concern and professionalism. "Are you okay, miss?" one of them asked. Brianna nodded again, though her throat felt tight. He grabbed me," she whispered. "They all did. They said it was a joke, but it wasn't." The officer gave her a reassuring smile. "We're going to take care of this. Can you tell us your name?" "Brianna Taylor." The officer's expression shifted, a flicker of recognition crossing his face. "Taylor? As in Mayor Taylor?" Brianna hesitated, then nodded. "He's my dad." The officer's demeanor instantly became more serious. He exchanged a glance with his partner, who stepped away to speak into his radio. "We'll get you home to your parents right away," the first officer said. "You don't need to worry about a thing." But Brianna did worry. As much as she wanted to feel safe, the memory of Derek's face and the way he had shouted at her made her stomach twist. Even now, with the police involved, it felt like a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. Meanwhile, Derek was sprinting through the woods, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Branches scratched at his face and arms, but he didn't care. All he could think about was getting away. He couldn't go to jail. Not for this. "This is her fault," he muttered under his breath, his voice filled with anger. "She made me do this." The sound of footsteps and voices behind him spurred him on. He pushed through a thick patch of bushes, emerging onto a quiet street. He had no idea where he was, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. Suddenly, a pair of headlights appeared in the distance, growing brighter as the car approached. Derek froze, unsure whether to hide or flag it down. Before he could decide, the car slowed and pulled to a stop beside him. The window rolled down, revealing a familiar face. "Derek," the voice said. It was Mr. Sanders, the gym teacher from school. "What on earth are you doing out here?" Derek's mind raced. He couldn't tell the truth, but he couldn't stay silent either. I got lost," he stammered. "Can you give me a ride?" Mr. Sanders frowned, clearly skeptical. "Lost? In the middle of the night? What's going on, Derek?" "I don't have time to explain." Derek snapped. Just help me, okay?" Mr. Sanders studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Get in." Derek climbed into the car, his hands still shaking. As they drove off, he glanced nervously out the window, half expecting to see the police chasing after him. For now, at least, he was safe. Back at the scene, The officers had taken Brianna to their squad car, where she sat wrapped in a blanket. Lauren and Casey were being questioned nearby, their faces pale and tear-streaked. Brianna couldn't hear what they were saying, but she didn't care. She just wanted to go home. The man who had saved her stood a few feet away, speaking quietly with another officer. Brianna overheard bits of their conversation. "She's the mayor's daughter," the man said. "They had her tied up in the back of that van." The officer nodded grimly. "This is going to be a high-profile case. We'll need to keep it under wraps for now." Brianna's stomach churned. She didn't want to be the center of attention. She just wanted things to go back to normal. Lauren and Casey were terrified as they sat in the back of another squad car. The reality of what they had done was sinking in fast. Lauren clutched her phone, which now felt like a ticking time bomb. She hadn't deleted the videos she'd taken, and the thought of the police finding them made her stomach turn. Casey broke the silence. "We're screwed," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We're actually screwed." Lauren didn't respond. She couldn't stop thinking about Brianna's face when they had shoved her into the van. She had thought it was all just a stupid prank, but now she realized how wrong she had been. "What do you think's gonna happen to us?" Casey asked. Lauren shook her head. "I don't know. But Derek's not gonna get away with this. Not after what he did." At the Taylor residence, Mayor John Taylor and his wife Angela were pacing the living room, their faces etched with worry. They had been notified of Brianna's disappearance hours ago, and every second that passed felt like an eternity. When the phone rang, John grabbed it immediately. "Hello? Is she okay?" "Mr. Taylor, this is Officer Grant. We've found your daughter. She's safe and on her way home." John exhaled sharply, his knees almost buckling with relief. Angela began to cry, clutching his arm as he relayed the news. "Thank you," John said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you so much." As the police car pulled up to the Taylor residence, Brianna's heart pounded. She had never been so glad to see her house. The front door flew open, and her parents rushed out, their faces a mix of relief and anguish. "Bri!" Angela cried, wrapping her daughter in a tight hug. "Oh my God, baby, are you okay?" Brianna nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'm okay, Mom. I'm okay." John placed a protective arm around her shoulders. "We're not letting this slide," he said, his voice firm. "Whoever did this is going to pay." Brianna didn't respond. She just buried her face in her mom's shoulder, grateful to finally be home. But as she lay in bed that night, her thoughts returned to Derek. She couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. And deep down, she knew she was right. The next morning, Cedar Creek was buzzing with news of the kidnapping. Word spread quickly, especially after a local journalist caught wind of the story. While the police worked to keep Brianna's identity private, the details were too explosive to contain for long. By noon, every major news outlet was running the headline. "Mayor's daughter kidnapped by schoolmates in shocking prank gone wrong." Brianna sat in the living room with her parents, watching the news coverage in silence. The footage showed police cars at the scene, blurry glimpses of the van, and even a brief interview with the man who had saved her. "They were just kids," he said, shaking his head. "But what they did, it's inexcusable." Angela muted the TV, her jaw tight with anger. "Kids or not, they need to be held accountable," she said. "I can't believe something like this happened to our baby." John nodded, his face grim. "The police are still looking for the one who ran off. Derek was it." Brianna flinched at the sound of his name. She hadn't told her parents everything yet, not about the bullying, not about Derek's hateful words. She wasn't sure she could. "They'll catch him," Angela said firmly, pulling Brianna into a hug. "And when they do, he'll answer for what he's done." Meanwhile, Derek was holed up in an old shed on the outskirts of town. He hadn't slept all night, too afraid of being caught. Every sound outside made him jump, convinced it was the police closing in. His phone buzzed. It was a message from Casey. "The cops know everything. They're looking for you. Turn yourself in before it gets worse." Derek scoffed, throwing the phone down in frustration. "Like I'm gonna do that," he muttered. But deep down, he knew Casey was right. The walls were closing in, and it was only a matter of time before he was caught. Still, the thought of jail terrified him. He needed a plan, something to turn the situation in his favor. As he sat there, an idea began to form. It was risky, but if it worked, it could change everything. At school, the atmosphere was tense. Almost everyone had heard about what happened, and the students were divided. Some were horrified by the news, while others whispered cruel jokes about Brianna, mocking her for being too sensitive or overreacting. Brianna didn't go to school that day, but she heard about it from her friends, Jasmine and Ethan, who came over after classes to check on her. "People are saying all kinds of stuff," Jasmine said, her voice filled with anger. "Some of them are actually defending Derek, like what he did wasn't a big deal." Ethan shook his head. "It's disgusting. You don't deserve this, Brianna." Brianna tried to smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Thanks," she said quietly. "I just want it all to go away." "It will," Jasmine said firmly. "Once they catch him, it'll all be over." But Brianna wasn't so sure. Derek's face was burned into her memory, and she couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't done with her yet. That night, Derek put his plan into action. He slipped out of the shed under the cover of darkness, heading toward a house on the other side of town. He moved quickly, keeping to the shadows, his heart pounding with every step. When he reached his destination, he crept around to the back and tapped lightly on a window. A moment later, the curtain moved, and Lauren's face appeared. Her eyes widened when she saw him. "Derek? What are you doing here?" she whispered, opening the window. "I need your help," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Let me in." Lauren hesitated. "The police are looking for you. If they find out you were here." "They won't," Derek interrupted. "I just need a place to lay low." "Please, Lauren. You owe me." Lauren bit her lip, torn. She knew helping him was a bad idea, but guilt and fear clouded her judgment. Finally, she nodded. "Okay. Come in." Derek climbed through the window, his mind racing. He didn't have much time, but he was determined to turn things around. And he knew exactly how to do it. The next day, Brianna woke up to another barrage of news alerts. This time, the headlines were different. "Kidnapping suspect makes shocking claims. She provoked U.S." Brianna's stomach dropped as she read the article. Derek had contacted a local reporter, claiming that Brianna had been bullying them and that the whole incident was a retaliation. "She thinks she's better than everyone else," Derek was quoted as saying. "We just wanted to teach her a lesson." Brianna's hands trembled as she put the phone down. "This isn't true," she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. "It's not true." Angela stormed into the room, phone in hand. "We're shutting this down," she said angrily. "Your father's already on the phone with our lawyer." Brianna nodded, but the damage was already done. Derek's lies were out there, and she knew people would believe him. The thought made her stomach churn. At the police station, Officer Grant sat at his desk, studying the case file. He had just finished interviewing Casey and Lauren, and the inconsistencies in their stories bothered him. Lauren had seemed especially nervous, and he suspected she was hiding something. He was about to follow up when a call came in from dispatch. "We've got a lead on Derek Hargrove," the dispatcher said. Anonymous tip placed him at a house on Maple Street. Grant grabbed his coat and headed for his car. He wasn't going to let Derek slip away again. Back at the Taylor house, Brianna sat with her parents, trying to stay calm as the news coverage continued. She felt trapped, like no matter what she did, Derek would find a way to twist the truth. Then the doorbell rang. John answered it, and his face darkened when he saw who was standing there. It was a reporter, microphone in hand, camera crew behind him. "We just want a statement," the reporter said. "Is it true that your daughter provoked the incident?" John stepped outside, closing the door firmly behind him. "Get off my property," he said coldly. The reporter persisted. "Mr. Taylor, the public deserves to know." "I said, get off my property." John's voice was louder now, and the reporter finally backed off. Inside, Brianna watched through the window, her heart sinking. She had hoped the worst was over, but now she realized it was only just beginning. The knock at the door late that night startled Brianna awake. She sat up in bed, her heart racing. She could hear muffled voices downstairs, her dad's angry tone, her mom's worried whispers. She swung her feet to the floor, grabbed her robe, and crept to the top of the stairs. From her vantage point, she saw two police officers standing in the doorway, their hats tucked under their arms. One of them was Officer Grant, the man who had helped her the night she was rescued. He looked tense. "What's going on?" Brianna's voice cut through the hushed conversation, and her parents turned to her, startled. Angela waved her hand gently, trying to ease her back. "Brianna, sweetheart, go back to bed." But Brianna shook her head, descending the stairs. "No. If it's about Derek, I want to know." Grant nodded solemnly, his expression heavy. "We found him." The words hung in the air like a storm cloud. Brianna's breath caught. "Where is he?" she asked, her voice trembling. "He was hiding at one of his friend's houses," Grant explained. "We arrested him a few hours ago. He's in custody now." Brianna felt a strange mix of relief and unease. "So, it's over." Grant hesitated. "He's claiming he was forced into the situation by his friends. He says he didn't want to hurt you and that it was all a misunderstanding." John's jaw tightened. "That's ridiculous. My daughter was tied up and shoved into a van. How does he explain that?" "He's trying to shift the blame," Grant admitted. "And some people are already eating up his story." Angela's voice rose, uncharacteristically sharp. "What kind of people believe a child kidnapped another child because they were forced to?" "This is absurd." Grant sighed. "Unfortunately, public opinion can be unpredictable. But we're building a strong case, and the evidence speaks for itself. Derek won't get away with this." Brianna nodded, but the knot in her stomach remained. She thanked Grant softly as her parents walked him to the door. When they returned, Angela sat beside her on the couch, wrapping her in a warm embrace. "It's okay to be scared, honey," Angela said. "But I promise you, we won't stop until justice is served." The next morning, Brianna's name was plastered across every news outlet. Despite the police's attempts to keep her identity private, a leak had occurred, and now the entire town, and beyond, knew that the mayor's daughter had been the victim. The focus shifted away from Derek and onto Brianna's family, sparking a media frenzy. Brianna stared at the TV, her stomach churning as a reporter speculated about her life. As the daughter of Mayor Taylor, Brianna has likely been sheltered her whole life. Some are questioning whether her privileged upbringing played a role in this incident. Privileged? Brianna muttered bitterly. She turned off the TV and threw the remote aside, tears welling in her eyes. Jasmine and Ethan came over again after school, both looking just as furious as she felt. "I can't believe they're saying this stuff about you," Jasmine said, pacing the living room. "Like it's your fault somehow." "They're just looking for a way to sensationalize it," Ethan added. "People love a scandal." "But this isn't a scandal," Brianna said quietly. "It's my life." Her friends didn't know how to respond. The weight of the situation was pressing down on all of them. Meanwhile, Derek was sitting in a holding cell, his hands cuffed in front of him. His lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s named Ms. Preston, leaned across the table, speaking in a low voice. "They don't have solid proof that this was your idea," she said. "If you stick to your story, there's a chance we can argue that you were manipulated by the others." Derek's mind raced. It was a lie, of course, but he was desperate. "What happens to me if they believe that?" Ms. Preston adjusted her glasses. "Best case, you'll face a lighter sentence. Maybe even probation, depending on the judge." "And if they don't believe it?" Derek asked, his voice shaking. "You'll be looking at serious charges. Kidnapping, unlawful restraint, endangering a minor." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "You could be in prison for a long time." Derek swallowed hard. He hated the idea of throwing Casey and Lauren under the bus, but he hated the idea of prison more. "Okay," he said finally. "I'll stick to the story." At school, things were getting worse for Brianna. Some kids rallied around her, but others whispered cruel remarks behind her back. She overheard one girl in the hallway say, if her dad wasn't the mayor, no one would even care. Brianna gripped her books tightly, trying to block out the words. But when she turned the corner, she found a flyer taped to her locker. It was a photo of her face, taken from the news, with the words "Crybaby Princess" scrawled across it in bold letters. Her knees nearly buckled as she ripped the flyer down, her cheeks burning with humiliation. Jasmine and Ethan arrived moments later, their expressions turning to outrage when they saw the torn paper in her hands. "Who did this?" Jasmine demanded, looking around. "I don't know," Brianna said, her voice trembling. "And I don't care. I just want to go home." But as they walked to the principal's office to report the incident, Brianna noticed a group of kids standing nearby, laughing quietly. Among them was Lauren. Lauren's face turned red when she saw Brianna looking at her. She quickly looked away, pretending to be interested in her phone. But Brianna's heart sank. Even after everything, People like Lauren still saw her as a target. That night, Brianna sat at her desk, staring at a blank sheet of paper. Her parents had suggested she write down how she felt, hoping it would help her process everything. But every time she picked up her pen, the words refused to come. She was about to give up when her phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "You think you've won, but this isn't over." Her blood ran cold. She stared at the message, her hands trembling. Was it Derek? One of his friends? Someone else entirely? Brianna quickly showed the text to her parents, who immediately called the police. Officer Grant arrived within minutes, taking her phone as evidence. "We'll trace it," he promised. "If it's Derek, it'll add to his charges. But what if it's not him?" Brianna asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Grant didn't have an answer. He just placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder and said, "We'll find out." But as Brianna lay in bed that night, the words from the text echoed in her mind, and she realized she wasn't just scared, she was angry. Whoever sent that message wanted her to feel powerless. But she refused to give them the satisfaction. "This isn't over," she whispered to herself, staring into the dark. And for the first time, she meant it. The next morning, Brianna woke up determined to take control of her narrative. She was tired of being the victim, tired of letting fear and humiliation dictate her life. If Derek, or whoever sent that text, thought they could silence her, they were wrong. She got dressed, tied her hair into a high ponytail, and sat down at the kitchen table. Her parents were already there, discussing the latest developments with Officer Grant over the phone. Angela looked up, surprised by the resolute expression on Brianna's face. "What's wrong, sweetie?" she asked. "Nothing," Brianna replied firmly. "I want to speak up." Angela blinked. "What do you mean?" "I want to tell my side of the story," Brianna said. "To the news, to my school, to everyone. If Derek gets to lie about me, then I deserve to tell the truth." John frowned. "Brianna, this is a delicate situation. The police are handling it." "I know, Dad," Brianna interrupted, "but people need to hear what really happened. Not just for me, but for other kids like me. Kids who get bullied and don't have anyone to stand up for them." Angela placed a hand over John's, her gaze softening. "She's right. If she's ready, we should support her." John hesitated, his protective instincts warring with his respect for his daughter's courage. Finally, he nodded. "All right, Bree. If this is what you want, we'll help you." That afternoon, Brianna sat in her living room, facing a reporter from a respected local news station. The cameras were set up, and the interviewer, a kind woman named Ms. Harper, smiled reassuringly. "We'll take this at your pace," Ms. Harper said. "You don't have to say anything you're uncomfortable with." "I'm ready," Brianna replied, her voice steady. The interview began, and Brianna recounted her story, how the bullying had started, how it escalated, and how Derek and his friends had taken things too far. She didn't embellish or dramatize, she simply told the truth. "What do you want people to take away from this?" Ms. Harper asked. Brianna took a deep breath. "I want people to understand that bullying isn't just kids being kids. It's real, and it hurts. And when people don't take it seriously, things like this can happen. I'm lucky to be alive, but some kids aren't as lucky." Angela wiped away a tear as she watched her daughter speak. When the interview ended, Ms. Harper thanked Brianna for her bravery and promised to handle the story with care. The interview aired that evening, and it didn't take long for the public to rally behind Brianna. Social media lit up with hashtags like #JusticeForBrianna and #EndBullying. Messages of support poured in from around the country, and even some of her classmates began to change their tune. But not everyone was sympathetic. Derek's parents held their own press conference, insisting that their son was innocent. They painted him as a victim of peer pressure, claiming he had been manipulated by Casey and Lauren. "He's a good boy," Mrs. Hargrove said tearfully. "He made a mistake, but he doesn't deserve to be vilified like this." The comments section on the news article about the press conference was a battleground. Some people sided with Derek, blaming Brianna for blowing things out of proportion, while others called out the Hargroves for enabling their son's behavior. At school, the atmosphere was tense. Brianna returned for the first time since her interview, and the hallways felt different. Some students smiled at her or gave her encouraging nods, while others whispered behind her back or avoided her entirely. As she approached her locker, Jasmine and Ethan rushed to meet her. "How are you feeling?" Jasmine asked. Nervous, Brianna admitted. But I'm not hiding anymore. Ethan grinned. Good. You shouldn't have to. As they walked to class, a familiar voice stopped them in their tracks. Hey, Brianna. They turned to see Lauren standing a few feet away, looking awkward and unsure of herself. Can I talk to you for a second? She asked. Brianna hesitated, then nodded. Okay. Jasmine and Ethan exchanged wary glances, but stepped back to give them privacy. Lauren shifted nervously, avoiding eye contact. I wanted to say I'm sorry, she said. For everything. I never meant for it to go this far. Brianna folded her arms. You didn't stop it though. You stood there and laughed while they hurt me. Lauren's face crumpled. I know. I was scared. Derek can be really intense. That's not an excuse, Brianna said, her voice firm but not unkind. You could have spoken up. You still can. Lauren nodded, tears in her eyes. I want to. I'll tell the police everything, I promise. Brianna studied her for a moment, then said, Good. Because this isn't just about me. It's about making sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. Later that evening, Brianna received another text from the same unknown number. You should have kept your mouth shut. This time, she didn't cry or panic. She showed the message to her parents, who immediately called Officer Grant. Within an hour, the police had traced the number. It's not Derek, Grant said, his expression grim. The number belongs to someone else. Who? Angela asked, her voice sharp with concern. Grant hesitated. Another student at Brianna's school. A boy named Jake. Apparently, he's friends with Derek. Brianna's stomach churned. She didn't even know Jake that well, but the thought of another person targeting her was exhausting. We'll handle this, Grant assured her. Jake will face consequences for this harassment. Brianna nodded, but her frustration was mounting. For every step forward, it seemed like there was another setback. Still, she refused to let it break her. As she lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, she whispered to herself again, this isn't over. But now, it wasn't just a statement of fear. It was a promise. The following day, Brianna's story continued to dominate the news cycle, but the focus shifted after Jake's identity was revealed. The boy, a known troublemaker at school, was suspended immediately. His parents issued a public apology, but his connection to Derek added fuel to the fire. Jake's text had one unintended consequence. It rallied more people to Brianna's side. If she had been doubted before, this harassment silenced many of her critics. But it also made Derek's remaining supporters more vocal, as they insisted that the entire situation was being blown out of proportion. Brianna's parents decided to hire private security for her. Though the idea of being followed by bodyguards made her uncomfortable, she understood their concern. Every time she left the house, she could feel the weight of people's eyes on her, whether it was reporters, classmates, or random strangers who recognized her from the news. At school, tensions were higher than ever. Teachers struggled to maintain order as students divided into factions, those who supported Brianna, and those who still sympathized with Derek. Fights broke out in the hallways, and social media became a battlefield, with hateful comments and heated arguments spreading like wildfire. Brianna did her best to keep her head down, but it wasn't easy. On her way to math class, she passed a group of boys who muttered loudly enough for her to hear. Maybe if her dad wasn't the mayor, none of this would have happened. She's just trying to ruin people's lives. Brianna clenched her fists, but didn't stop walking. She had learned that responding only gave them more power. Jasmine caught up with her a moment later. Don't let them get to you, she said. They're just jealous because you had the courage to stand up for yourself. Brianna smiled weakly. I know. It's just exhausting. Ethan joined them as they reached their lockers. Hey, did you hear? Lauren turned in her statement to the police. Really? Brianna asked, surprised. Yeah, Ethan said. Apparently, she admitted that Derek was the one who planned the whole thing. She also said Casey tried to stop it, but Derek wouldn't listen. Brianna frowned. She didn't know how to feel about Casey. He hadn't been as cruel as Derek, but he hadn't stopped him either. Do you think he'll get in trouble? Probably, Jasmine said. But not as much as Derek. He's the real ringleader. Meanwhile, Derek sat in a courtroom, his hands cuffed in front of him. His lawyer, Ms. Preston, stood by his side, her sharp gaze scanning the room. The preliminary hearing was packed, with reporters and spectators cramming into every available seat. The prosecution laid out the charges against him: kidnapping, unlawful restraint, and harassment. Each word felt like a weight pressing down on Derek's chest. When the judge asked him to plead, his voice was barely audible. "Not guilty," he muttered. Ms. Preston patted his shoulder, but her expression remained neutral. She knew this case would be an uphill battle, especially with Lauren's statement now on record. As the hearing continued, Derek's parents sat in the back row, their faces a mix of anger and despair. They had hired Ms. Preston in the hope of protecting their son, but the evidence against him was damning. They avoided eye contact with the press, who whispered and pointed in their direction. When the hearing ended, the judge ordered Derek to remain in custody until his trial. As he was led away, he glared at the reporters, his face twisted with rage. "This isn't over," he muttered under his breath. That evening, Brianna received a call from Lauren. She hesitated before answering, unsure of what to expect. "Hi Brianna," Lauren said, her voice shaky. I wanted to let you know that I told the police everything. I'm sorry it took me so long." "Thank you," Brianna said softly. "I know it wasn't easy." Lauren sniffled. "I should have stood up to him sooner. If I had, maybe none of this would have happened." "You can't change the past," Brianna said. "But you can make better choices now." Lauren was quiet for a moment, then said, "If you ever need anything, I'm here. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'll do whatever I can to make this right." Brianna nodded, even though Lauren couldn't see her. "I appreciate that." After hanging up, Brianna felt a strange sense of relief. Lauren's apology didn't erase the pain she had caused, but it was a step toward closure. The following week, Brianna attended a school assembly organized by the administration. The topic was bullying and harassment, and the principal invited Brianna to speak. She stood on the stage, her hands shaking as she looked out at the crowd. "I used to think I could handle everything on my own," she began. "When the bullying started, I told myself it wasn't a big deal. But ignoring it didn't make it go away. It only got worse." The auditorium was silent as she spoke, her voice gaining strength with every word. "What happened to me wasn't just a prank. It was a crime. And it could have ended much worse." She paused, meeting the eyes of as many students as she could. "If you see someone being bullied, don't stay silent. Speak up. Because silence lets the bullies win." When she finished, the audience erupted into applause. Brianna felt a small flicker of hope. Maybe her story would make a difference. But later that night, Brianna received another text. "You think you're a hero, but you're just making things worse. Watch your back." This time, the number was blocked. Brianna stared at the message, her chest tightening. Whoever was behind these texts wasn't giving up, and she couldn't help but wonder what they would do next. The next morning, Brianna woke up feeling a mix of anger and determination. The threatening text from the night before was fresh in her mind, but she refused to let fear dictate her actions. She showed the message to her parents, who immediately contacted Officer Grant. "We'll try to trace this," Grant said after examining her phone. "But with a blocked number, it might take time. What do we do in the meantime?" Angela asked, her voice tight with worry. "We'll increase security around your home and at Brianna's school," Grant replied. "We'll also inform the school administration about the threat. Brianna, I need you to stay vigilant. Don't go anywhere alone, and if you notice anything unusual, let someone know immediately." Brianna nodded, though her chest felt heavy. She hated feeling like a target, but she knew she had no choice. At school, the increased security was noticeable. 2 officers patrolled the hallways, and teachers were on high alert. While some students seemed reassured by the extra precautions, others whispered that it was overkill. "Seriously," a boy muttered as Brianna walked by with Jasmine and Ethan. "All this because of her." "Shut up, Jared," Jasmine snapped, glaring at him. "You wouldn't last a day in her shoes." Brianna tried to ignore the comments, but they stung. She couldn't understand why some people were so eager to downplay what had happened to her. During lunch, Ethan leaned in and whispered, "Have you noticed Lauren acting weird lately?" Brianna frowned. "Weird how?" "She's been avoiding everyone," Ethan said. "And I overheard her talking to someone on the phone earlier. She looked really nervous." Jasmine shrugged. "Can you blame her? She's probably scared of Derek's friends." Brianna considered this, but didn't say anything. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. That evening, While Brianna was doing homework, her phone buzzed with another text. Her stomach dropped as she opened it. "You should have stayed quiet. Now you'll regret it." Her hands trembled as she showed the message to her parents. John immediately called Officer Grant, who arrived within the hour. "This changes things," Grant said after reading the text. "The language is escalating. Whoever this is, they're trying to intimidate you, and they're getting bolder. Can't you do something?" Angela asked, her voice cracking. "You said you'd trace the number." "We're working on it," Grant assured her. "But in the meantime, I want Brianna to stay home from school for a few days. It's safer that way." Brianna's heart sank. "I can't just hide forever," she said. "That's what they want." "You're not hiding," John said firmly. "You're staying safe. There's a difference." Reluctantly, Brianna agreed. But as she lay in bed that night, staring at the shadows on her ceiling, she couldn't shake the feeling that something big was coming. The next day, Brianna stayed home while Jasmine and Ethan kept her updated on what was happening at school. During lunch, Jasmine called her. "You're not going to believe this," she said, her voice low. "Lauren didn't show up today, and people are saying she got a threatening note in her locker." Brianna's stomach twisted. "A note? What did it say?" "Something about keeping her mouth shut or else," Jasmine said. "I don't know the exact words, but it's bad." Brianna felt a chill run down her spine. If Derek's friends were targeting Lauren, it meant they were getting desperate. "What's the school doing about it?" she asked. "Not much," Jasmine said bitterly. "The principal said they're investigating, but you know how that goes." Brianna sighed. She hated feeling so powerless. That night, things took a turn. Brianna was watching TV with her parents when the doorbell rang. John went to answer it, only to find no one there. He frowned, stepping outside to look around, but the street was empty. "Probably just a prank," he said when he came back inside. But an hour later, the doorbell rang again. This time, John was ready. He opened the door quickly, but again, no one was there. However, a piece of paper was taped to the door. Angela pulled it off and unfolded it, her face going pale as she read the words. "Leave town, or you'll be sorry." Angela immediately called the police, who arrived within minutes. Officer Grant examined the note, his jaw tightening. "This is no longer just harassment," he said. "It's a direct threat." "Do you think it's Derek's friends?" John asked. "Most likely," Grant said. "But until we have proof, we can't rule anything out." Brianna sat silently, her heart pounding. She thought about Lauren and the note she had received. She thought about the texts and the whispers at school. The fear she had been trying so hard to push down was beginning to creep back in. As the police left, John locked all the doors and double-checked the security system. "No one's getting in here," he said firmly. But Brianna wasn't reassured. Whoever was behind this wasn't just trying to scare her, they were escalating. And she had no idea what they might do next. That night, as she lay in bed, her phone buzzed again. She hesitated before picking it up, dreading what she might see. "We're closer than you think." Her blood ran cold. This time, the message came with a photo. It was a picture of her house, taken from the street. Brianna's scream brought her parents running. She showed them the text, tears streaming down her face. "They were here," she whispered. "They're watching us." John grabbed his phone, calling Grant again. Angela held Brianna tightly, her own fear barely contained. As the night stretched on, Brianna sat with her parents in the living room, the lights on and the curtains drawn. None of them dared to sleep, knowing that whoever was behind the threats wasn't done yet. The police presence around the Taylor home intensified after the chilling text with the photo. Squad cars were stationed outside, officers patrolled the street, and the Taylors were advised to stay indoors at all times. Despite the security measures, Brianna felt more trapped than ever. Officer Grant arrived the next morning with an update. "We traced the sender of the photo," he said. "It was sent from a disposable phone purchased yesterday. Unfortunately, that makes it harder to track who's behind this, but we're following leads." "What kind of leads?" John asked, his voice sharp. Grant hesitated. "We believe the person responsible has ties to Derek's circle. We're cross-referencing the names of his known associates and focusing on anyone with a history of similar behavior." Angela's hands tightened around her coffee cup. "And in the meantime? What about my daughter?" "She's our top priority," Grant assured her. "We'll keep her safe." But Brianna couldn't shake the feeling that whoever was behind the threats wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted. At school, the tension was palpable. Students whispered about the threats against Brianna and Lauren, and rumors spread like wildfire. Some speculated that Derek was orchestrating everything from custody, while others believed it was one of his friends acting independently. Jasmine and Ethan kept Brianna updated through texts and calls. During lunch, Jasmine called her with more unsettling news. "Casey's been acting really weird," she said. "He's been avoiding everyone and looking over his shoulder like he's scared." "Scared of what?" Brianna asked. "I don't know," Jasmine admitted. "But I heard he told the principal he wanted to switch schools. He wouldn't say why." Brianna frowned. "Do you think he knows something?" "Maybe," Jasmine said. "But if he does, he's not telling anyone." The conversation left Brianna uneasy. Casey had always seemed like the least dangerous of Derek's group, but his sudden behavior change made her wonder if he was hiding something important. That evening, as the Taylors sat down for dinner, a loud crash shattered the calm. The sound of breaking glass echoed through the house, and Brianna froze, her fork clattering to her plate. John jumped to his feet. "Stay here," he ordered, rushing toward the source of the noise. Angela grabbed Brianna's hand, pulling her close. "It's okay," she whispered, though her trembling voice betrayed her fear. Moments later, John returned, his face grim. "Someone threw a brick through the living room window," he said. It had a note attached. Grant arrived minutes later and examined the brick and the note. The scrawled words made Brianna's stomach churn. "This is your last warning. Leave Cedar Creek, or you'll regret it." "This is escalating faster than we anticipated," Grant said, his tone grim. "I'll have a team sweep the area and increase patrols. Whoever's behind this is getting bolder." Angela's voice shook with anger. "Bolder? They just threw a brick into our home. What's next?" "We're not waiting to find out," John said. "Brianna, pack a bag. We're taking you somewhere safe." "What?" "No." Brianna protested. "I'm not running away." "This isn't up for debate," John said firmly. "Your safety is more important than anything else." Brianna felt tears prick her eyes, but she didn't argue. She knew her parents were only trying to protect her. That night, the Taylors moved into a secure location arranged by the police. It was a modest house on the outskirts of town, guarded around the clock by officers. Though the new environment was safer, it felt cold and unfamiliar. As Brianna sat in her temporary bedroom, scrolling through her phone, a notification popped up. Someone had tagged her in a post. Curious, she opened it, and her heart sank. The post was a blurry photo of her and her parents entering the safe house, captioned, "Running won't save you. We know where you are." Brianna's hands shook as she showed the post to her parents. John's face darkened, and Angela immediately called Grant. "This isn't just harassment anymore," Angela said, her voice shaking. "They're stalking her." Grant arrived within the hour, his expression tense. "The post came from an anonymous account, but we're working to trace it. This changes everything. We're dealing with someone who's actively monitoring your movements." "What do we do now?" John asked. "We'll relocate you again if necessary," Grant said. "But I need to know, has anyone in your circle been acting suspicious? Anyone who might have leaked your location?" Brianna's thoughts immediately went to school. "Casey," she said suddenly. "He's been acting really nervous lately. Like he's hiding something." Grant nodded. "We'll look into it." The next day, Grant visited Casey's house to question him. The boy was visibly anxious, his eyes darting around the room as he spoke. "I don't know anything," Casey insisted. "I just want all this to be over." "Casey," Grant said firmly, "if you're protecting someone, now's the time to come clean. This has gone too far." Casey hesitated, his hands trembling. Finally, he broke down. "It's Derek," he admitted. "He's been sending messages to his friends from custody, telling them what to do." Grant's eyes narrowed. "How is he contacting them?" "He has a phone," Casey said. "Someone smuggled it in. He's been using it to give orders." Grant wasted no time. He left Casey's house and contacted his team, instructing them to search Derek's cell. Within hours, they found the contraband phone hidden in a vent. At the safe house, Grant informed the Taylors of the discovery. "We found Derek's phone," he said. "He's been orchestrating everything from custody." Brianna's stomach turned. So he's the one who sent the texts? The threats? Not directly, Grant said. He's been using his friends to do his dirty work. But now that we've confiscated the phone, he's lost his main line of communication. Will this stop the threats? Angela asked. It should slow them down, Grant said. But we're not taking any chances. We'll keep the increased security in place until we're sure the danger has passed. That night, Brianna lay in bed, trying to process everything. Derek's reach was deeper than she had imagined, and even though his phone had been confiscated, she couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't done. As she drifted off to sleep, a question lingered in her mind. If Derek could orchestrate all of this from custody, what else was he capable of? The discovery of Derek's phone brought a temporary sense of relief, but it was fleeting. Brianna knew Derek's ability to orchestrate the threats from custody proved how far he was willing to go, and she couldn't shake the feeling that he had more in store. The next morning, Officer Grant returned with updates. Derek's phone had a series of messages to a contact listed only as J. We're working on identifying who that is, but it's clear they were instrumental in carrying out his threats. Is it Jake? Brianna asked, her voice tight. The one who sent me those texts? Possibly, Grant said. But we're not ruling out other possibilities. We'll know more soon. Angela sighed heavily, her worry evident. What does it take for this nightmare to end? Grant's face softened. We're close. I promise you that. At school, tensions remained high. Casey's confession had spread among the students, and many began to turn against Derek's circle of friends. Even Jake, who had once been vocal in defending Derek, was now lying low. During lunch, Jasmine and Ethan called Brianna to fill her in. People are finally waking up, Jasmine said. Nobody wants to be associated with Derek anymore. But it doesn't feel over, Ethan added. Jake hasn't shown up all week, and there's a rumor going around that Derek had more people involved. Brianna frowned. More people? Like who? I don't know, Ethan admitted. But if it's true, you need to be careful. That evening, Brianna received another text, but this one was different. Instead of a threat, it was a photo. It showed Casey sitting alone on a park bench, looking terrified. The caption read, "One by one." Brianna immediately showed the message to her parents, who called Officer Grant. When he arrived, he studied the photo with a grim expression. This is a clear escalation. Whoever sent this is targeting not just you, but anyone who cooperates with us. What are you going to do about it? John demanded. We'll track down Casey and ensure he's safe, Grant said. But I need you all to stay vigilant. This person is growing more desperate. The next day, Casey was found near the park, shaken but unharmed. He told police he had been followed by someone in a dark hoodie but hadn't seen their face. The fear in his voice was unmistakable. They're coming for me because I talked, he said. They're trying to scare me into staying quiet. Grant reassured him that he would be protected, but the incident only deepened the sense of unease. That night, as Brianna sat in her room, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a video. She hesitated before opening it, her heart pounding. The video showed a dark room, lit only by the glow of a single candle. A figure in a hoodie stood in the shadows, their face obscured. The voice was low and distorted, but the message was clear. This isn't over, Brianna. You thought you could destroy us, but we're just getting started. Watch your back. Brianna's breath hitched. She showed the video to her parents, who immediately called Grant. This is beyond harassment, Grant said after watching the video. This is psychological warfare. They're trying to break you. Well, it's not going to work, Brianna said, her voice trembling but resolute. I'm not giving up. Grant nodded, admiration in his eyes. Good. Because we're not letting them win. The police worked tirelessly to trace the video, and within hours, they had a lead. The IP address used to upload the video was linked to a known associate of Derek, a boy named Mason, who had kept a low profile throughout the investigation. Officers arrived at Mason's house early the next morning. Inside, they found not only the device used to send the video, but also a notebook filled with detailed plans of harassment and intimidation. It was clear Mason had been working closely with Derek. When questioned, Mason broke under pressure. It wasn't just me, he admitted. Derek planned everything, but Jake and I were supposed to carry it out. He wanted to ruin Brianna's life. The confession was the breakthrough the police needed. With Mason's cooperation, they arrested Jake and tied him directly to the threats and harassment. Derek's grip on his network of allies began to crumble. For the first time in weeks, Brianna felt a sense of relief. The arrests brought a sense of closure, though she knew it would take time to fully heal. Her parents embraced her, proud of her courage in the face of such relentless adversity. 2 weeks later, Brianna stood in a courtroom, facing Derek as his trial began. She delivered her testimony with poise, recounting the pain and fear he had caused, but also highlighting her determination to move forward. Derek avoided her gaze, his once confident demeanor replaced by a hollow silence. His friends had turned on him, his plans had failed, and he now faced serious consequences for his actions. As the trial concluded and Derek was led away in handcuffs, Brianna felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The nightmare was over. In the weeks that followed, Brianna became a voice for change, speaking out against bullying and harassment. Her story inspired others to come forward, and her school implemented new policies to address these issues more effectively. Though the scars of the ordeal remained, Brianna emerged stronger, knowing she had turned her pain into purpose. As she stood before her classmates at a school assembly, she smiled and said, "We can't change the past, but we can change what happens next. Together, we can make sure no one else has to go through what I did." The applause was deafening, and for the first time in a long while, Brianna felt truly free.